Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavati Tamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us, may he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We are reading from the Tales and Parables of Sri Ramakrishna, many of which you may have read in the Gospel, if you've read the Gospel or have gone to our classes, and but a few of them you haven't. But tonight we're reading from the section on pitfalls, and we're going to start with man proposes and God disposes.
Ramakrishna is speaking to Pratap Chandra Mazumdar. You are an educated and intelligent man, and you're a deep thinker too. Keshav and yourself were like two brothers, Gur and Nitai. You've had enough of this world, enough of lectures, controversies, schisms, and the rest. Do you still care for them? Now it is high time for you to collect your scattered mind and turn it towards God. Plunge into the ocean of divinity. Mazumdar replies, why, yes, revered sir, that I ought to do. There's no doubt about it. But all this I do simply to preserve Keshav's name and reputation. Sri Ramakrishna says, let me tell you a story. A man built a house on a hill. It was only a muddy hut, but he had built it with great labor. A few days later, there came a violent storm, and the hut began to rock. The man became very anxious to save it and prayed to the God of winds. Oh, God of the winds, please don't wreck the house. The God of the winds paid no heed to his prayers. The house was about to crash. Then he thought of a trick. He remembered that Hanuman was the son of the God of the winds. But once he cried out, oh, revered sir, please don't pull down the house. It belongs to Hanuman. I beseech you to protect it. Still the house continued to shake violently, and nobody seemed to listen to his prayer. He repeated many times, oh, this house belongs to Hanuman. But the fury of the winds did not abate. Well, then he remembered that Hanuman was a devoted servant of Rama, whose younger brother was Lakshmana. Desperately, the man cried, oh, this house belongs to Lakshmana. But that also failed to help matters. So as the man cried out as a last resort, this is Rama's house. Don't break it down, O God of winds. I beseech you most humbly. But this too proved futile, and the house began to crash down. Whereupon the man who had to save his own life rushed out of it with a curse. Oh, let it go. This is devil's own house. You may not be anxious to preserve Keshav's name, but console yourself with the thought it was, after all, owing to God's will that the religious movement connected with his name was set on foot, and that if the movement had had its day, it also is due to that same divine will. Therefore, dive deep into the sea of immortality.
Yeah, so true. As we've mentioned several times, in the big scheme of things, everything is going to go in time, and so the trick is to not get attached to it, and yet we still have to do what we can to live in the world responsibly. So you want to take care of things. You don't want to just be not caring about things and think, well, it's all going to go anyway, so we won't bother to maintain things. You still have to maintain things, but here in Los Angeles, it could be an earthquake. Other places, it could be a hurricane or wildfires or whatever. And so we always have to be prepared that everything will go away in time. And many times when things are taken away from us, we find that there's another door that opens, another opportunity comes, or something happens that would not have happened if it hadn't been for the disaster. And so we oftentimes have to realize that maybe the whole big scheme that God has is not known to us, and we can't really predict what's really good for us and what's not. I remember one friend of mine had a nice job, and then the manager of the particular business, you could say, that he was in changed hands, and they didn't like him, and they wanted to change the whole nature of the business in some way. And he wasn't that far from retiring, so he finally, he had to get a lawyer, but he finally made a deal to retire a little bit early and went down to another city. And within a couple of days, he walked into another facility, and they were looking for just the services he wanted. And so he ended up with a nice position in a different part of the state, and is very happy with it. So this is often the case, that if something disastrous happens, you just have to assume that God has a better idea of what you need and what's good for you, and something will come to fruition that you really didn't expect. And ultimately, this is all just the play of Maya. And, even people that die by, if you have a near-death experience, a lot of times people in the near-death experience realize that this divine play is quite mysterious, and that we don't understand what's going on from in the relative plane, but from a higher standpoint, then things are seen to actually be working for the best. All right, well, let's look at another one. This is, as one thinks, so one receives.
You changed the order. Excuse me, I thought we had a different order.
I'll go back to the next one.
Okay, very good.
Mm-hmm.
As one thinks, so one receives. A magician was showing his tricks before a king. Now and then he exclaimed, "Oh, come confusion, come confusion, come delusion. Oh, king, give me money, give me clothes." Suddenly his tongue turned upward and clove to the roof of his mouth. He experienced kumbhaka. He could utter neither word nor sound and became motionless. People thought he was dead. They built a vault of bricks and buried him there in that posture. After 1,000 years, someone dug into the vault. Inside it, people found a man seated in samadhi. They took him for a holy man and worshipped him. When they shook him, his tongue was loosened and regained its normal position. The magician became conscious of the outer world and cried, as he had 1,000 years before, "Come confusion, come delusion. O king, give me money, give me clothes." God is the Kalpataru, the wish-fulfilling tree. You will certainly get whatever you ask of him, but you must pray standing near the Kalpataru. Only then will your prayer be fulfilled. But you must remember another thing. God knows our inner feeling. A man gets the fulfillment of the desire he cherishes while practicing sadhana. As one thinks, so one receives.
Here we go. Yeah, certainly you have to keep your thoughts aligned to the best ideals that you have. You don't want to think bad thoughts even about yourself. This is often a self-fulfilling prophecy. Otherwise, if you constantly think of yourself as worthless or a sinner or is incapable of doing anything or nobody really likes me, you'll find that that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you go around with the attitude nobody likes you, you're going to project that thought and people aren't going to like you. So the best thing is to keep the best thoughts possible. Frankly, I find this parable a little bit inscrutable as to the moral of the story. I'm not sure quite what he was thinking is what happened, although I suppose he couldn't take advantage of his samadhi. I mean, perhaps that's the ideal here. If he had had his thoughts on something other than getting clothes and money from the king, once he had experienced Kumbhaka, he would have gone into a spiritual state, and when he came out, he would have come out in a spiritual state. But in this case, he just came out wanting the same things he wanted before, and he wasn't really geared to getting what he actually fell into his lap, and then he just didn't appreciate it and wasn't able to sustain that. So this is often the idea that we have to keep in mind with our spiritual practice too. Our spiritual practices are so that when a spiritual experience comes, we will be able to sustain it. Otherwise, one can either simply not recognize it, which apparently is what happened to this chap here, is he wasn't able to integrate it into his thinking, and he just went back to his old ways. Or you could end up with a mental derangement, which happens when people do certain kinds of sadhana too intensely, and they become a bit unbalanced mentally. And many times people become fanatical about something because they're not really prepared for the spiritual experience they got. So all of these things are important to keep in mind so that we think of ourselves as potentially divine, and we're doing our spiritual practices in order to uncover that divinity. So then when a glimpse of spiritual reality comes, we're able to hold on to it. We won't shy away from it. We won't misinterpret it, and it won't derange our mind. All right, let's go back a couple parables. And the reason I put this off is because I have a musical version of this, and so we thought we'd put that more towards the middle. This is the pundit who couldn't swim, and you've probably heard this told by some of our lecturers. Swami Vedanta tells a very good version of it, and we're going to hear a very short version here, and then an extended version that's musical. All right, let's read what we have here first.
Once several men were crossing the Ganges in a boat. One of them, a pundit, was making a great display of his erudition, saying that he had studied various books, the Vedas, the Vedanta, and the 6 systems of philosophy. He asked a fellow passenger, "Do you know the Vedanta?" "Oh, no, revered sir." "Samkhya? Patanjala?" "Oh, no, revered sir." "Have you read no philosophy whatsoever?" "No, revered sir." The pundit was talking in this vain way, the passenger sitting in silence, when a great storm arose and the boat was about to sink. The passenger said to the pundit, "Sir, can you swim?" "No," replied the pundit. The passenger said, "Well, I don't know Sankhya, or the Patanjala, but I can swim. So what will a man gain by knowing many scriptures? The one thing needful is to know how to cross the river of the world. God alone is real. All else is illusory.
Oftentimes, the version that's told is that it's the boatman that is asked these questions, and the boatman responds that he doesn't know these philosophies, and then when the storm comes and he's going to have to abandon his little boat, he asks the pundit if he can swim. Now, in my musical version, I actually have both the passenger and the boatman, and so the other passenger is a yogi farmer who is very strong, very good. He works hard, and he also does his spiritual practices. And so unlike the pundit, who only is learned in spiritual things but doesn't bother to practice, the boatman and the passenger does both. So this is the moral of this story. There's no point in learning all about the intricacies of the 6 systems of philosophy if you're not going to bother to practice them. So we'll listen to this musical version. And in this musical version, you'll hear the music get more and more agitated as the waves get higher and higher and higher.
Quite remote, you would not want to go spectacular, even when it's taught from books in vulgar bad vernacular.
I've never read a word of it, I'm sure it's very fine. I have to roll this boat in every hour the sun shines.
I have learned to quote it since it's literary treasure. Living life without it would remove 1/4 my pleasure.
Wind is picking up some more and waves are now lots higher. I will keep you posted if our fate is looking dire. For every more by silence, but I'd rather not participate. Time is rather precious and I'd rather sit and meditate.
It's something I'm sure you'd appreciate. Haven't you read even bits of transliterate?
No, sir, it's something of which I know zero, but you, sir, are surely a scholar's true hero.
Massa is one of philosophy's treasures, without which you've missed one fruitful thoughtless pleasure. It is a quarter of my source of gladness, living without which just seems like sheer madness.
Clouds are gathering, look over there. So much for weather continuing fair.
Without these you're missing the pleasures of life. Buy one of my books for you and your wife.
I really appreciate all your concern, but I am sure I have no time to learn.
I'd write a Vedanta is clearly the best. I'll ask some questions, pretend it's a test.
Sir, as I've hinted, a scholar I'm not. Time for the scriptures has not been my lot.
Vedanta again is a wonderful treasure, riches of which you'll live back in good measure. Not fully knowing philosophy's treasures, you're missing out on 3/4 of life pleasures. You'll get Vedanta all out of your reach. Have any money, I'm happy to teach.
Sorry, I'm stopping from your bragging until dusk, and I'm risking that you're thinking I am Plato. It's worse. The weather is quite stormy, and I warn you since I must. This boat is not as sturdy, and it moorings on the coast. The waves you see may fill this boat up to the very brim. Perhaps I should have asked of you how many of you swim, for this boat is not a match for such a storm, and now I think it is highly likely that this boat will surely sink.
I have not had the time to learn the art of swimming. It is the philosophy that my big brain is brimming.
Since you do not know how to swim, it seems as though you're lost. All of life's fair pleasures now will be your total cost. Myself, I will now swim my way back safely to the shore. Farewell, my poor fellows, I shall see you nevermore.
What am I to do? Am I to drown in this big river? Just the cold and rain has caused my body now to quiver. Just the cold and rain has caused my body now to quiver.
You know all the scriptures of the scholarly books, but it seems that you think you're better than the rest. You think that they're your precious animal races all for what? And for the last half hour, you did nothing but rebel. And your abundant is full of all hot air. But I doubt that air will only float so you beware. May not your philosophy give any good advice. Isn't there a practice you tried out just once or twice?
Any fidget practice and my knowledge now is a theory. Now I see I failed my life and life. Help me, oh please, oh never, I'm much too young to die. If I make it all alive, I swear I'll never criticize. And I'll take a vow to always practice what I preach. And I pray to God that this is how I vow I shall not preach.
Sir, you are a lucky man, for all is not a loss, for my labor makes me strong enough to get us across. Since you are not alone, you take help from what I need. I will take you to the shore and straight for set you free.
So the farmer saves the poor pundit and teaches him a good lesson. Tells him to practice what he preaches. All right, so skipping back across the ones that we've already done. Let's see, where are we? She is, yeah, that's the next one. Thank you. Sorry about that. She is so well off is the next one.
People with little occult power gain such things as name and fame. Many of them want to follow the profession of a guru and gain people's recognition and make disciples and devotees. If people say of such a guru, He's having a wonderful time. Well, how many people visit him? He has many disciples and followers. His house is overflowing with furniture and other things. People give him presents. He has such power that he can feed many people if he so desires. Well, the profession of a teacher is like that of a prostitute. It is the selling of oneself for the trifle of money, honor, and creature comforts. For such insignificant things, it is not good to prostitute the body, mind, and soul, the means by which one can attain God. A man said about a certain woman, she's having a grand time now. She's so well off. Well, she's rented a room and furnished it with a couch, a mat, pillows, and many other things. And how many people she controls. They're always visiting her. In other words, the woman has now become a prostitute, and therefore her happiness is unbounded. Formerly, she was a maidservant in a gentleman's house. Now she's a prostitute, and she's ruined herself for a mere trifle.
Yeah, so name and fame aren't all they're cracked up to be, and they don't last. And so the moral of the story is don't seek those in themselves. And this is very true. And you find that a lot in this town, Hollywood, where people come because they want to be a famous star and they want to get discovered. And then they find that's not so easy, first of all, that there are hundreds and thousands of other people that want to become discovered and become stars. And then many times the few that achieve that realize that now they've got the paparazzi following them, and their lives are characterized in various tabloids, and which don't always get everything right. And anything that's at least a bit seemly certainly makes it into the tabloids, and pretty soon they have absolutely no privacy at all. And so this idea of getting famous suddenly kind of loses its charm, that they become so tied to all of that. And then, of course, same thing with politicians. Every little bitty thing that they do becomes under scrutiny, and what seems like a very minor infraction is built up to be some horrible disaster. So getting fame is really more of a torture than a blessing. Everybody is after you for something, and money's the same way. If you have a lot of money, then everybody wants some of it, and they all start to become your very close friends. And you wonder why they're becoming your very close friend. Well, it's because they're hoping that at some point you'll give them a favor or two. And so it's like we had the earlier parable of the bird that had the little fish in its mouth, and all the other birds were chasing after it, and as soon as he dropped the fish, then they weren't so interested in that bird anymore. And this is the problem again. And people that win the lottery often find they're less happy afterwards than they were before. And that's often the problem, is that all their friends want a piece of the pie. And also they find that things cost more than they thought they would. Maybe they buy a vacation home, but then they realize they have to take care of the vacation home even when they're not there, and then they have to hire somebody to take care of it, and the expenses go on and on and on and on that they really didn't anticipate. And so pretty soon they've found that their finances didn't go as far as they thought they would, and they find the tax man takes a huge chunk, and so what they thought was a big prize is significantly smaller than it was. So all of these difficulties come. So name and fame are really not all they're cracked up to be. So not to worry if you don't have them. You can just thank your stars that you don't have them. All right, let's read Feigning Madness, too, is risky.
A certain person deeply involved in debt feigned madness to escape the consequences of his liabilities. Physicians failed to cure his disease, and the more he was treated for his ailments, the greater became his madness. At last, a wise physician found out the truth, and taking the feigning madman aside, rebuked him, saying, "My friend, what are you doing? Beware, lest in feigning madness you become really mad. Already you've developed some genuine signs of insanity." This sensible advice awoke the man from his folly. He stopped acting the part of a madman. By constantly acting a thing, one can actually become that.
Yes, yes. So, I often wonder how an actor that gets a particular role, and if it's a one-time movie or something, that's one thing. But these people that might be in a sitcom or a serial drama that goes on for years, and so they're playing this character every day for maybe a decade. You wonder how on earth they separate their character from the character of the actor that they played. Swami Prabhupada used to warn people about that here, because of course, many people that came had been in the acting business, and he said, well, try not to play a part that is a negative part, because you don't want to take on those characteristics of the negative character. No, and again, a small part is one thing, but to have to do it all the time can really be a danger. And of course, this person was lucky that they didn't lock him up in an insane asylum. If you're going to feign madness, they could easily lock you up, and then what have you gained? You might as well have been in prison for your original problem, as to be locked into the mental hospital. So you don't want to pretend that you're mad, for sure. And you don't want to pretend that you're something that you're not, too. So there's no point in pretending that you are a particular occupation or something. Eventually people are going to find out you're not good at that. And so it just becomes worse and worse. You just get yourself in deeper and deeper. Although there have been a couple of funny movies along those lines about the great imposter and so forth. And in a couple cases, they seem to be pretty good at it. So maybe that also proves the point. If you pretend long enough, maybe you get good at it. So thinking that way, we want to at least in our own minds think, yes, we are capable of spiritual practice. We are capable of realizing God. Now that's, again, you don't want to go broadcasting that all over the place and bragging like the pundit before you've actually been able to realize anything. But in your mind, you want to remember that you have that potential. And so when you sit down to meditate, you have to think, this may be the day, maybe this is the day when I am graced with the vision of God, or a spiritual experience, or a deep feeling of peace and inner quiet and calm and bliss. All right, so let's go on to welcome good and evil welcomes you.
A Brahmana was laying out a garden. He looked after it day and night. One day a cow strayed into the garden and browsed on a mango sapling of which the Brahmana used to take special care. When he saw the cow destroying his favorite plant, he became wild with rage and gave such a severe beating to the animal that it died of the injuries it got. The news soon spread like wildfire that the Brahmana had killed the sacred animal. When anyone attributed the sin of that act to him, the Brahmana, who professed himself to be a Vedantan, denied the charge. He said, "No, I've not killed the cow. It is my hand that had done it. And as God Indra is the presiding deity of the hand, it is he who has incurred the sin of killing the cow." not I. Indra in his heaven heard of this, and he assumed the shape of an old Brahmana. Coming to the owner of the garden, he said, Sir, whose garden is this? Why, it's mine. Oh, it's a beautiful garden. Why, you must have a skillful gardener, for see how neatly and artistically he's planted the trees. Well, sir, this is all my work. Trees were planted under my personal supervision and direction. Oh, very nicely done indeed. Who has laid out this path? It is very well planned and neatly executed. Well, all that has been done by me. Then Indra said with folded hands, when all these things are yours, and when you take credit for all the work done in this garden, it's not proper. The poor Indra should be made responsible for killing the cow.
Yeah, that's one aspect of avoida Vedanta, where you use Vedantic logic to avoid your problems. So this man was taking credit for everything except the sin of killing the cow. And so this is a warning. We have to, if we're going to take the attitude that God is the doer, then we have to take that attitude for all the things. We can't just take the credit for the good things and leave all the bad things for God being the doer. So the attitude of God being the doer is a wonderful attitude, but you have to keep it all of the time, not just part of the time when it's convenient. So that's an important moral to remember. And we are trying to remember that God is the doer all the time, but you can't just use that as an excuse when it's convenient. All right, what occult powers are like?
Ramakrishna is speaking here. Hridoy asked me, I was then under his control, to pray to the Divine Mother for occult powers. I went to the temple. In a vision, I saw a widow, 30 to 35 years old, covered with filth. It was revealed to me that occult powers are like that filth. I became angry with Hridoy because he had asked me to pray for powers.
Yeah, of course, there are lots of other stories too, lots of other parables where somebody gets, 3 wishes from a genie, or they discover that they have some power, and they're careless about the way they use it, and they end up in terrible trouble. And so that's exactly the point here, is that these occult powers often get people into trouble. And so why would you want them? And even if you could manage to do a few good things, then you're going to have all sorts of people after you to do these things. And then you have to wonder, what are the karmic consequences that we're changing here? It's like movies that go where you do time travel and you go back in time to try to change something that you think is a terrible wrong that happened in the past, and you discover that even worse things happened when you changed them. This is like occult powers. The powers, the problems of the powers are what are hidden. They cause all sorts of difficulties that can't be foreseen. And so they just add delusion to delusion, you could say. And so we're always warned not to ask for occult powers. And if they come, don't encourage them, don't culture them, don't practice them. Occasionally, some type of occult power might come in the process of spiritual practices, but we don't want to cultivate them and practice them and use them over and over again. I remember one devotee told me that when she was doing her spiritual practices, she got at one point she realized that she could read people's minds, and she thought this was a great distraction, and so she had to consult her guru, and he said, yes, isn't it a pain? You have enough thoughts of your own. Who wants to have your mind cluttered up with the thoughts of everybody else? And so she was guided as to how to drop that particular problem. So these are the kinds of things that occasionally occur when people pursue spiritual life. You get these powers, and you have to then make sure you don't cultivate them. Usually that's all it takes, is simply not cultivating. Think of them as side shows that are trying to distract you from the path. You're going along a highway going to your destination, and you want to get there at a certain time, and somebody's holding a big sign and they're waving, come this way and do this and do that, and or they've got one of those blow-up animal figures that waves in the wind or something, and you've got a big sail going on and so forth. And so you're getting distracted. You're going to go now spend your time and your money doing something other than continuing the journey to the destination where you're going. And so that's what these occult powers are like, is that they're simply distractions along the path, and they don't really help you get to the goal at all. In fact, they make it worse. They make it harder to get to the goal. All right, we have time for one more.
Horses in Cowshed. The instruction of a man who has not seen God does not produce the right effect. Oh, he may say one thing rightly, but he becomes confused about the next. Samadaya delivered a lecture, and he said, God is beyond words and mind. He is dry. Worship him through the bliss of your love and devotion. Just see, he thus described God, whose very nature is joy and bliss. What will such a lecture accomplish? Can it teach people anything? Such a lecture is like the man who said, my uncle's cowshed is full of horses. Horses in cowsheds? From what you understand, that there were no horses at all, nor cows either.
Yeah, so we have to try to practice what one preaches, and one needs to say things from their experience. You know, parables are a common way of teaching. Buddha used parables, Jesus used parables, Ramakrishna used parables. Parables are good stories that help us to understand certain principles that sometimes they're not that difficult to understand, but the stories make them more memorable. They make them stick in our mind better than they would if we were simply told something. So, you know, like your parents telling you don't cry wolf, and then they tell you the story about somebody who kept pretending that there was a problem and the wolf was coming to attack, and then everybody would rush, and then there was no wolf. And then one day the wolf actually did come, but nobody believed the person when they yelled, oh, come help, there's a wolf coming. And so this is, that kind of story sticks in your mind, and so you don't just tell lies like that just to gain attention and to play pranks on people. They're not really funny in the long run. They actually are very harmful. So these kinds of things are very useful. And many times fairy tales and Aesop's fables and the Jataka tales, all of those kinds of tales are very useful for us to help us in our spiritual practices, so that we can remember what's happened. Oftentimes, we'll remember stories from our childhood that stick with us all our life. The Puranas are also another example of that, except they're, of course, much longer tales. Of course, there are shorter tales within them that we often remember, incidences. And that's the purpose of that set of literature, is that they're relating things in a story form so that we can remember them. If we only had scriptures that put out the teachings in a very straightforward manner, it wouldn't be as interesting to people, and they wouldn't remember them. Especially when you're a little kid, if you get told stories, you're going to tend to remember them. And so many people that have been raised with the Mahabharata and the Ramayana can tell you about the various stories that occur in those great Puranic legends. And so, again, you don't need to worry about the historicity of these kinds of tales. They're probably based on historical teachers, but there have probably been stories added to their lives in order to illustrate certain principles. So I just gave a lecture about Jesus and all the different versions of the Gospels that arose about Jesus. And a lot of people worry about, well, gee, if they're not really true, then is Christianity just not worth listening to? But they miss the whole point of the stories that are told about Jesus. They're meant to illustrate different principles about his life and not to necessarily be history. We think they should be history maybe, but maybe they're not history. And so we have to remember not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I had a professor of Bible literature in college, and I often thought that he'd studied the Bible to death. He'd studied it so much that he really didn't believe in it anymore. And so I think he really was missing the point there. And so we have to guard against that. But these parables that Sri Ramakrishna taught are really lasting little stories. And we're lucky to have such a wealth of them from an avatar that's so recent that we can be pretty reliably sure of what was said. All right, well, let's close with a chant, and hopefully we will see you next week. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace.
I don't know if you take questions, but maybe other people know the answer to this. But when we do the prayers, it says you shouldn't be attracted to or impressed by the occult powers. When you told me one of the occult powers is being able to shrink somebody or make them disappear, so I didn't have a clear answer.